Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show that takes that stack of source material, the research, all the notes, and really pulls out the knowledge you need to get up to speed fast.
And today we're diving into something that, well, it touches everyone. Money. It's probably the biggest source of anxiety, decision-making. You name it.
Right.
And we're looking at it through these ancient sources, which, you might not expect, but they get incredibly specific. They lay out this whole theology of wealth, of ownership, that honestly cuts right through all our modern economic ideas.
So for you listening, the mission here is pretty critical. Get a quick but deep understanding of the foundational ideas about money and wealth from these biblical teachings. We really want to pin down God's role, his structural role in human finance, because that, the sources suggest, is the pathway to what they call financial freedom.
And just look at the sheer volume of text on this. It tells you right away, this isn't some minor side topic. We're not talking a few verses here and there. The sources, the Bible dedicates something like 2,350 verses just to finances, property, wealth management. It's extensive.
Wow, that number alone.
Yeah.
It really should grab your attention. If these ancient texts focused that much on wealth, we probably should too. And the sources point out Jesus himself apparently talked about money and possessions more than almost anything else.
Which just underscores the challenge, doesn't it? Money is constantly pushing on us, influencing us. It's the lens for so many choices about our time, our energy, our security, our future.
Yeah.
So we absolutely need to grasp why it's so prominent in these texts and, crucially, figure out the ultimate ownership structure. Who's really in charge here?
And that search, that need for clarity on the structure, it really has to start with God's identity, right? The sources remind us God uses, over 250 names for himself, titles that define who he is and what he does.
Exactly. We know names like Yahweh Jireh the provider, or Yahweh Rapha the healer, Yahweh Shalom, Lord of peace, Emmanuel, God with us. These define relationships, attributes. But when you zoom in specifically on God's relationship to human wealth, to assets, one title just rises above everything else. It defines the whole structure of ownership.
And that title is Lord.
Correct. In the context of finance, Lord basically translates to master or owner. And that is the absolute bedrock definition for the biblical view of money.
Okay, master on it.
If God is fundamentally the Lord, the owner, in this financial picture, well, that leaves only one spot for us, doesn't it? We're either servants or maybe managers, stewards. What we're definitely not is the ultimate owner.
Right.
And just recognizing that relationship, that simple fact, it shifts the entire game when it comes to financial security, anxiety, everything.
Okay, let's unpack that relationship right away. Because if you establish God as the absolute Lord, the master of everything, that leads straight into this core conflict the source is present, it's unavoidable.
Yeah, the message is stark. It's presented as a moral and, frankly, a practical absolute. The sources are crystal clear. One person cannot possibly serve two ultimate authorities at the same time. You just can't. You have to pick one master.
And the specific term they use is, it's direct. You cannot serve God and Mammon. Now, we should probably clarify Mammon for people today. It sounds kind of archaic, maybe sinister.
Right. It sounds like some old deity or demon. But in the original languages, Aramaic, Greek, the word mammon simply means wealth, property, money. That's it.
So the paradox then is money itself, the coins, the bills, the assets.
That's neutral?
Morally speaking.
Exactly. It's just a tool, a medium of exchange. But, and this is the critical part, the service of money, the allegiance you give it, the focus, the constant attention you pour into getting it, keeping it, growing it, that's what turns the tool into a master, into a kind of pseudo-lord. And when you elevate that tool, you automatically, necessarily compromise your allegiance to the true Lord.
So the conflict is really psychological, spiritual too, I guess. If I spend all my energy, my mental space, my emotions just chasing and managing money, then the money system itself kind of becomes the boss of my life.
And the sources absolutely confirm that deep psychological link. They remind us of that simple but totally inescapable truth. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.
Can't avoid it.
No, it's a fundamental connection. If your main focus, your energy, your emotional investment, your treasure is constantly tied up in gaining or protecting wealth, then every single decision you make, how you spend your time, your emotional energy, how you calculate risk, all of it gets dictated by what you think that wealth demands.
So if the main goal becomes just accumulation, the sources are pretty blunt about what happens when you choose to serve Mammon. What's the actual payoff?
It delivers perpetual dissatisfaction. Exhaustion, really. The texts warn straight up, pursuing money means you're always running after it and you will never catch up. It's this endless chase. It becomes a kind of psychological bondage. Just think about it today. How do people define financial security? It's always a moving target, isn't it?
Yeah, always seems just out of reach.
You might hit, say, $100,000 in savings, then boom, the market dips, or healthcare costs jump, or maybe social pressure says you need a bigger house, and suddenly the goalpost shifts to $500,000 or $1 million. It never ends.
That constant running, that feeling of never being quite secure enough,
Yeah.
that sounds exactly like being enslaved to the system.
It is, absolutely. The pursuit of mammon demands your total devotion, but it never actually delivers lasting peace or rest. It constantly frustrates you with sudden changes, global events, economic downturns, the kind of stuff we see all the time now.
Right.
You end up in bondage, not really to the money itself, but to the relentless pursuit of enough money. And the only way out of that trap, according to these sources, is to completely redefine who the ultimate owner, the ultimate master truly is.
Okay, so that sets up the counter-principle perfectly. And this seems like the absolute foundational truth, structurally speaking.
Yeah.
The very first principle you need to grasp to escape that endless chase, the first step towards any kind of biblical financial freedom, is recognizing God's absolute ownership, his sovereignty.
This is completely non-negotiable in the source material. It's described as the fundamental lesson Christians have to learn if they want to avoid constant struggle, internal and external, about wealth.
Doesn't matter how much you actually have.
It doesn't matter at all. If you miss this core principle, you're basically guaranteed to struggle spiritually with money, whether you're rich or poor. And the declaration of his ownership, it leaves absolutely no room for argument.
And the sources show this wasn't just some abstract theological point. It was baked into their worship, right? A liturgical thing.
That's right. There's that phrase from a psalm they apparently used, maybe when entering the temple or sacred space. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein. And notice the scope. This isn't just flowery language about some local god. It's a claim of universal jurisdiction. It crosses national borders, economic systems, religious lines. God owns the entire cosmos and everything and everyone in it, period.
But practically, how do we square that absolute divine ownership with, having a deed to my house or property rights or modern banking?
Well, the sources reconcile it by framing human ownership as always temporary. Conditional, really. It's more like temporary administration. Think about land itself, the most basic asset.
Okay.
Those ancient Jewish customs, the sources mention, they were really strict about land use. Land couldn't be sold permanently. And why? Because God explicitly said, the land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine.
So even if you bought it, held the title, passed it down for generations, you were always meant to understand you were just a visitor, a temporary manager on God's property.
Exactly. You're a sojourner. And that principle holds true even outside ancient Israel, if you think about it. Look at political power today. Nations exist. Individuals have property rights, sure. But those rights are limited, aren't they? By things like eminent domain, taxes, sometimes even constitutional changes. Human ownership is never absolute.
And you can see just how limited human authority is by looking back through history, even just a little way.
Precisely. Just look back, say, 100, 200 years, what do you see? Constant change. Dynasties rise and fall. Empires crumble. No kingdom, no emperor, no government has ever permanently held on to its territory.
True.
Political power, military might, it's all temporary. Because the ultimate sovereignty, the ultimate ownership belongs somewhere else. It always rests with the creator.
And this sovereignty, this ownership claim, it goes deep, right? Like literally beneath the surface, into the raw materials that actually fuel our whole global economy.
Yes. God explicitly claims ownership over that hidden wealth, too. He says, "The silver is mine and the gold is mine," declares the Lord of hosts. The raw resources buried in the earth, they're his. This isn't wealth we generate from nothing. It's wealth he provided.
Our sources say that really striking example from modern times. Talking about Australia's economy over the last couple of decades.
Yeah, that anecdote really brings it home and makes it tangible. Australia's long-term economic strength doesn't primarily come from, say, its manufacturing sector, which the sources noted is actually pretty small compared to others.
Right.
It comes from these incredibly rich, God-given natural resources. Huge deposits of high-grade copper, iron ore, coal. Things just sitting in the ground there.
So the argument was that Australia's success isn't mainly down to human cleverness or political skill, but it's a direct result of geology, of divine provision.
That's exactly the point the sources were making. The crucial question they pose is, do those incredibly valuable mineral deposits belong to the Australian government by right? No. They belong to God. He put them in that specific part of the earth. The nation benefits massively because of his provision. Think about it. If those resources vanished overnight, if that divine provision stopped Australia's whole economic standing, its global position would change dramatically. It shows how dependent we are, even at a national level, on his providence.
And we see that same dependence play out in nature all the time, especially with farming, which, let's face it, still feeds us all.
Yes. The source mentioned that story about the brother working on a huge potato farm. They were going through this terrible drought, a really long dry spell, financially crippling.
Right. Irrigation can only do so much.
Exactly. Their systems were running flat out, but they just couldn't cover the massive area needed. The company was looking at huge losses.
And then suddenly the drought breaks. Heavy rains, perfectly timed.
And that single event, just nature doing its thing, saved that company, quote, several million Australian dollars.
Yeah.
It just highlights the massive scale of divine provision that we humans simply cannot replicate or control.
Yeah, you can't just turn on a tap and get that kind of coverage.
You can't irrigate a whole region like that.
Right.
It's physically, logistically impossible for us. It just hammers home that core idea. Even our most advanced production methods ultimately depend on the owner's direct intervention, his timing, his provision. We plant the seeds, we water them, but it's God who makes them grow.
Okay, so that idea of provision naturally leads us to an even deeper layer of God's ownership claim. It's rooted in his ongoing work as both creator and sustainer, right?
Yes, and we really need to dig into the difference between God's creative power and our human efforts, because that difference is what establishes his ultimate authority over us and everything we think we control.
I mean, we look at human ingenuity, engineering, tech, it's amazing stuff. But we're always starting with something that already exists, aren't we?
That's the fundamental distinction. It's the difference between creation ex nihilo out of nothing and manufacturing. Divine creation is ex nihilo. God speaks, and the basic stuff, the elements, the matter itself, comes into being. He created the iron, the copper, the gold, the carbon atoms.
Okay.
Humans, on the other hand, we can only create or manufacture by taking the materials God already provided and then combining them, refining them, shaping them, designing with them. We can make steel or plastic, but we can't make the iron or the carbon atoms from absolute nothingness. That power belongs solely to the Lord, and it fundamentally grounds his ownership claim.
And just the sheer complexity of that initial creation. It says a lot about the wisdom of the designer, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh.
The sources really emphasize the incredible complexity, the intricate order, the wisdom that's just woven into the fabric of the earth. It's clearly not random. It's intelligent. It's structured.
You see evidence everywhere.
Everywhere. We're still basically playing catch-up, trying to mimic nature. There's that whole field, biomimicry. We study birds to figure out better flight dynamics for planes. We look at fish scales to make faster swimsuits. We analyze spider silk, hoping to make stronger materials.
We're essentially trying to reverse engineer designs that were apparently perfect right from the start.
Exactly, which strongly suggests there's a master designer, a mind behind all this complexity. We're not independent creators, we're users, working within an incredibly sophisticated system that was handed to us, fully formed.
And that creative act wasn't just a one-time event ages ago. The sources connect his role as creator to his ongoing active role as sustainer. They mention passages, Colossians, John, saying all things hold together by him, and that everything, visible and invisible, was created through him and for him.
That phrase, hold together, is incredibly profound. The implication is, if God were to withdraw his sustaining power for even an instant, the whole universe might just unravel. He's actively upholding every physical law, every quantum interaction, moment by moment. And critically, for our discussion about finance and security, the sources explicitly include the invisible realm in what he sustains.
And what does that invisible realm cover beyond, say, angels or spiritual things?
It includes things like political structures, organizational authority, rulers, principalities, powers, the very systems that govern human society, from the smallest group to the largest nation, exist only because he allows and sustains them.
Okay, that has huge implications for anyone putting their ultimate trust in government, or a specific job title, or even a political system.
It really does. God grants authority to rulers, to institutions, yes. But he can also retract it. And he often does. The sources draw a direct line here. Our health, our position, our power, it can all be lost or taken away in an instant. It highlights just how temporary human authority really is. No ruler, no CEO, no system is permanent.
So if we look at the kind of instability we see globally right now, The sources mention things like the conflicts in the Middle East, Israel on. How does this idea of God sustaining everything connect to that kind of geopolitical chaos?
Well, it offers the only real point of stability, paradoxically. Any security we try to build on human systems, whether it's international treaties, market forecasts, a guaranteed pension plan, it's inherently fragile.
Right.
The sources use current events like those conflicts as a kind of stark illustration. Human agreements, lines drawn on maps, political alliances, they're constantly shifting, being redrawn. They're temporary. But because God sustains all things, he remains the only truly trustworthy, stable anchor. If we genuinely believe he's still ultimately in control of history's unfolding, still sustaining the universe itself, then even when the world looks increasingly chaotic, his plan is still moving forward, his sovereignty is dependable. And that fundamental belief is where the steward finds their rest, their real security.
Okay, so if God is the absolute owner, the sustainer of everything, what's the practical takeaway for us? How do we actually walk that path towards the freedom the sources talk about, freedom from the anxiety that money brings?
It boils down to one really radical structural shift in perspective and action. You have to consciously entrust the security of all those assets entirely back to God. True financial freedom, as these sources define it, isn't about having a certain amount of money. It's freedom from the anxiety and the bondage of money itself.
And that takes a deliberate internal act, right? A kind of surrender. The Christian has to actually go through the exercise of handing perceived ownership back to God. The whole mindset needs to flip from mine, my money, my house, my career, my investments, to God's, entrusted to me. I'm just the manager.
Yeah, the steward. And if you refuse to make that deep, comprehensive surrender, the sources are pretty blunt about the outcome. You will stay trapped in that cycle of endless chasing and never quite being satisfied. You'll always be pursuing a goal that keeps moving, always defining your worth and security by a number that's never, ever high enough.
We have that incredible, almost cautionary tale in the sources that illustrates the futility of chasing wealth outside of God's ownership. King Solomon.
Solomon's life is like the ultimate case study. Historically, biblically, he was the wealthiest man, the wisest man, the most powerful and influential figure imaginable. He had literally unlimited resources to pursue anything and everything.
Built massive projects, had tons of gold.
Unbelievable amounts of gold. He built lavish palaces, created extravagant gardens, pleasure resorts. He collected knowledge, prestige, power, hundreds of wives and concubines. He basically ran the experiment. Can acquiring everything the world offers actually deliver ultimate satisfaction?
He tested the hypothesis for all of us, really.
He did. He chased every kind of physical pleasure, every form of intellectual achievement, every type of material accumulation available to a human being. And after all that, after having more than anyone before or since, what was his final verdict, his conclusion in his later years?
That it was all vanity, meaningless, utter futility.
And that is the core lesson for anyone listening. Wealth, power, wisdom, even wisdom. When they're not seen as gifts to be managed under God's ownership, they inevitably lead to this profound, unavoidable emptiness. Why? Because the steward understands deep down that everything you pile up is temporary, it's all going to pass away.
Makes sense.
If the richest, wisest guy in history couldn't find lasting satisfaction in his stuff, what chance do the rest of us have if we're operating under that same illusion of personal ownership?
Which brings us right back to living as a steward. And that means applying this principle of surrender, of recognizing God's ownership to every resource he gives us. It's not just about the cash, is it? It's our time, our talents and skills, and our finances.
Let's talk about talents for a second, because that's one people often miss. We tend to feel personal pride in our abilities, right?
Yeah.
Our technical skills, maybe artistic gifts, leadership qualities, public speaking.
Yeah, I worked hard for this skill.
Right. But the steward sees those very skills as gifts from God. How does that change things for, say, a talented musician or a brilliant surgeon?
How does it?
It fundamentally prevents pride and arrogance. If you're an engineer designing amazing things or a speaker holding an audience captive, you have to operate with the constant awareness that God could instantly remove that ability.
Right.
An accident could injure your hands, a sickness could take your voice. If you truly understand you're just administering a temporary gift, a talent God loaned you, you stay humble, and your focus shifts to, how can I use this gift for the owner's purposes, not just for my own glory or gain?
That framework, it has to change every single financial decision we make, doesn't it?
It changes the filter completely. As a steward, every decision from a major investment down to a small daily purchase has to pass through a new question. Does this align with God's kingdom purposes? Does this reflect his will for this asset he's entrusted to me? That becomes the defining check.
Which is so drastically different from the default human question, which is usually just, how does this benefit me? Does this make me feel more secure?
Exactly. That shift from pure self-interest to kingdom participation is the absolute hallmark of a true steward. And it radically changes how we view giving, too.
Right. Offerings, donations. They're not really giving money to God or the church like we're doing him a favor or meeting his need.
No, not at all. Giving becomes this simple yet profound act of just returning to God a portion of what he already owns. It's acknowledging his total ownership and our role as grateful managers. We're simply allowing some of his resources that he temporarily put in our care to be used directly for kingdom building.
So the act itself is worship.
It's an expression of trust. It's the ultimate test of whether we truly rely on him as the faithful provider. And the blessing isn't just in the giving, it's in the comprehensive surrender that makes the giving possible.
Oh.
Okay, so once we actually embrace that steward mindset, we then have the right, the basis, to fully lean on the promise of God as the faithful provider. He promises provision. The key verse that always comes up is Matthew 6.33. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you.
Now, we need to be really careful with all these things, don't we? Because sometimes in modern teaching, that gets stretched to mean, a life of guaranteed luxury, perfect health, constant prosperity.
Yeah, that's a common misreading. The sources are clear. The immediate context defines all these things very specifically. It refers to the basic necessities of life, food, and clothing.
Okay.
There's another source that states the biblical standard for contentment quite plainly. Having food and clothing, let us be content. And the sources made the point that realistically, probably everyone listening to this deep dive already meets or likely exceeds that basic biblical standard of provision.
That immediately shines a really bright, maybe uncomfortable light on that critical distinction every steward has to learn to make.
Right.
The difference between a genuine need and a want. That distinction seems to be where the real battle often lies.
It absolutely is. I loved that anecdote in the sources about the spouse who developed the habit of asking one simple question before any purchase. Is this a need or a want? Just asking that question forces a complete stop-and-think moment, a reevaluation of almost every spending decision. It can be quite revealing.
And the sources talked about how easily we slip into what they call the luxury trap. Can you unpack that a bit?
Yeah, the trap is mostly psychological. These sources used examples like chasing after ultra-high-end audio equipment or really specialized camera lenses or maybe super expensive consumables like fine wine or gourmet coffee.
Great.
The illusion we often buy into is that owning the absolute best, the top-of-the-line thing somehow proves our superior taste, our discernment. It supposedly shows we can truly appreciate the quality, and that validates our status or expertise.
But the reality often doesn't match up, does it?
No. The truth, as the sources suggest, is that frequently, if you did a proper blind test, most people genuinely couldn't tell the difference between the super expensive item and a perfectly good mid-range one. That $5,000 speaker might sound identical to the average ear as the $1,000 one. It reveals that a lot of our spending isn't driven by actual necessity or even genuine appreciation of superior quality, but more by perceived status, the feeling of ownership, or just wanting something new.
So it pulls us into this kind of unreal world of consumption where we burn emotional energy chasing wants instead of just trusting the owner to provide for our actual needs.
And history, both biblical and otherwise, seems to confirm that God consistently provides the necessities, but he rarely, if ever, just hands out luxury simply because we demand it.
The classic biblical example is Israel wandering in the desert for 40 years.
Right. Perfect example. God provided manna every single day. That was the necessity.
Yeah.
Basic life support, it kept them alive. But when the people started grumbling, demanding the finer things, the fish, the cucumbers, especially the quail they remembered from their time as slaves in Egypt, that was pursuing wants. Wants born out of discontent, not actual need. God's faithful provision always covers the need. Wants are a different category.
And even looking at Jesus' miracles in the New Testament, when he provided food, there was usually a bigger point than just the meal itself.
Absolutely. Take feeding of the 5,000. The primary goal wasn't just to hand out lunch because people were hungry. The sources explain that the miracle was mainly intended to demonstrate his divine authority, his identity as the Son of God, so that the people would then believe his words, especially his claim to be the bread of life.
Oh, okay.
So provision, whether it's daily manna or a miraculous multiplication of loaves and fishes, it consistently serves a higher purpose in these texts. It's meant to lead to deeper trust, deeper reliance on his word and his character, not just provide temporary comfort or luxury.
And that kind of deeper trust, that full reliance, seems to unlock blessings that go way beyond what you can track on a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
The sources told that really lovely story about the spouse who was living completely by faith during a ministry trip in Taiwan.
Yes, that's a perfect illustration of how comprehensive, surrendered faith can open doors to provision in unexpected ways. This spouse was in Taiwan doing ministry, visiting people, often relying on personal funds or support. They went into a shop to buy a small gift for a host family.
Okay.
While they were making the purchase, just chatting with the staff member, completely unprompted, offered and then gave them a free manicure and pedicure right there in the shop.
Wow, just like that.
Just like that. The spouse hadn't asked for it, certainly wasn't expecting it, didn't pay a cent for it. It was totally out of the blue.
That kind of blessing, you can't budget for that.
Yeah.
It's just this direct, personal, unexpected sign of care.
Exactly. It illustrates that when someone is truly operating in that space of full faith and surrender, trusting God for everything, he often demonstrates his detailed personal care in ways that completely transcend normal financial transactions. He goes far beyond just making sure the bills get paid. He provides these unexpected personal touches, these comprehensive moments of care that really prove he's paying attention to the details of our lives. It's like proof that God's blessing isn't ultimately limited by the number in our bank account. It's limited perhaps only by our willingness to truly surrender and trust him as an owner. When we step fully into that steward role, his provision can become incredibly tangible, sometimes even miraculous, and that's what ultimately frees us from that constant nagging anxiety of never enough. #outcheck outro. So if we were to wrap up this whole deep dive, the main takeaway seems to be this: that chronic burden, the worry, the anxiety that so often surrounds money. It usually comes from chasing wants, things like status, luxury, or some illusion of absolute security, not typically from a genuine lack of basic needs. God has clearly promised comprehensive care for our necessities.
And the gateway, the key to finding that rest, that peace, that release from financial anxiety is getting that foundational principle absolutely right.
Yeah.
God's total ultimate ownership. Once we truly surrender our perceived ownership back to him, we gain actual freedom. Freedom from the pressure of always needing to chase more.
We've really focused today on defining God's role, the absolute owner, the sustainer. Next time, we absolutely need to flip the coin and examine our corresponding role. What does it mean practically to be a steward? How do we actually manage the specific resources, time, talent, finances that he entrusts to us day by day?
But let's leave you, the listener, with maybe one final provocative thought to chew on. If life itself, our very breath, is the single most valuable asset we possess, and these sources are adamant that God is the Lord of life, the one who gives and sustains it, then doesn't that make everything else we try to grab onto seem kind of secondary? When we inevitably leave this life, we will release everything we thought we owned. Every dollar, every possession, every title, it all goes. So isn't it infinitely wiser, infinitely more freeing to make that conscious act of release, that surrender of ownership now, while we can still gain the peace and freedom from anxiety that comes with it, rather than clinging on to it all in worry and bondage, right up until that very last inevitable moment? Something to think about until our next deep dive.